Prequel, The Walls in the Middle of Idumea, Chapter 5, 1 week later. It was a long procession of wagons that creaked slowly to the outskirts of the northeastern village of Winds late at night. In the darkness, 20 men and women waited quietly. They knew who was arriving, and they prepared as much as they could, and all concerned thought it best that the newest members of their village arrive when no one knew they were coming. Jesse still had men roaming the world, and recently garters had become active again, looking. Only High General Pershin knew the full truth of any of that. He rode in the lead wagon, wearing dark trousers and an old gray work shirt. No uniform tonight. None were seen anywhere, although soldiers were everywhere. The lead wagon came to a stop, with the 8 behind it rumbling to silence as well. Per wearily stumbled out of the wagon and peered into the gloom for his contacts. A few women came up to shake his hand, and he quietly directed them to the wagons. Some men followed them after receiving instruction. The row of small houses had been recently freshened up, along with a few hastily built homes. A man as dark as the night made his way up to High General. His height was nearly as tall, but his stature far leaner and more muscular. During the day, he was an imposing figure. At night, he was quite terrifying. But appearances were deceiving, fortunately. "Nice to see you again," Shin said, grinning at the man. "Although it's so dark, I'm only assuming you're my former corporal, but few men were as large as we are. It's been what, well over 15 years? What have you been doing with yourself since you left the army?" The man extended his hand to shake Per's. His voice was even deeper as he answered, "It is indeed me, sir. And congratulations on becoming High General. Even back when I knew you as a lieutenant, I realized you had great potential. And had you stayed longer than 2 years, you'd be a sergeant major by now. You don't have to butter me up, former Corporal Hafati. You already have the job." The man chuckled, and Per patted him on the back. "Tuma, thank you again for taking this on. I was so relieved when you agreed to help. You're a hard man to track down, though." "Sorry about that, General. Unlike most people in the world, I do get around. But I'm glad you remembered my cousin was a rector here. He knew how to contact me. And he and his wife and congregation have been exceptionally helpful," Per said. "They've put all this together in such little time. But I'll be honest, Tuma, I think we've bitten off a little more than we can chew." "Sir, do you need something to eat?" Hafati asked. "I imagine riding in wagons for 2 days has left you worn out, and you're making food references again, buttering up, chewing." "I forgot how astute you are, always noticing the little things. Actually, I'm famished, but I don't feel I can eat until we get them secured in their new houses." "Leave that to me, sir. I've made all the arrangements. It will be extremely difficult for any killing squads or even garters, if they exist here, to get past me and my men." "I'd feel better if you told me it'd be impossible for them to get past." "General, you know that's not a promise any of us can make." True, Per sighed. "I also know no one will do a better job than you for these poor people who have recently lost their family farm and adjoining houses to a massive fire." Yes, I heard the flames could be seen for miles around, an astonishing blaze." "Truly tragic," said Per somberly. "It's so fortunate we could find all of them homes in the same area, and that so many of their relatives decided to move with them as support in their new village." They watched for a few minutes as the wagons unloaded in the lamplight and people moved into their new homes. "It needs work," Hafati mumbled. "The story, it's too clunky." "Agreed," Per sighed. "But there's been so many things to get lined up, I haven't given the story too much thought." "Leave it to me. I'm good with stories." "Remember, the more real it is to you and everybody else, the easier it will be for everyone to believe," Per told him. "Keep this second truth as close as you can to the first truth, and even the 8-year-old won't trip up on it." Hafati eyed him in the dark. "Don't take this the wrong way, sir, but you have a gift for lying. Are there some interesting jobs you do on the side?" Per snorted. "Nah, I just think about how someone would deceive me. I listen to what's been said, and more importantly, what hasn't been said. For example, I noticed that you didn't tell me what you've been doing for the past 15 years, but that you skipped over that question in order to compliment me. Now it was Pear's turn to eye Hafati. His new head of security for the former servants chuckled. Well done, sir. Compliments again. You're being very secretive. Not at all, General. Actually, the past 19 years, and yes, it's been that long, have been rather quiet. I'm a teacher now. Teaching what? Pear asked. Whatever needs to be taught, Hafati said cagily. And quite recently, I took on an interesting side job. I also got married, and I am a father. Congratulations! What's your wife and family think of you being here? Well, she was a little hesitant at first, since I'll be away for a few moons, but I told her just enough about the situation so that she agreed this is a necessary job to take. Must be hard to be separated from her. I can hear in your voice how much you love her. How far away is your family, Tuma? Close enough for visits? I can arrange that. Hifadi hesitated. Nearly got me there, sir. You know I won't reveal the location of my family to anyone, not until we're sure of the security of this family. Well done, Pear said. That's why I wanted you. Even as a younger man, you were so quick to catch on. Anytime you want to rejoin the army, I'd love to take you. I could really use you in Idemia. Thank you, sir, but my wife would leave me if I even mentioned the name of the city. So, she's not in Idemia then, said Pear breezily. Hifadi groaned. Oh, well done, sir. So perhaps I'm a little rusty. That's all right. Still means there are at least 16 more villages she may be in. I'll get it out of you eventually. Then visit your wife and tell her how much she wants her husband to rejoin the army. He elbowed Hifadi, who chuckled. Sorry, sir, but no chance. I'm in my 40s now. So am I. And? Fair enough. But I'm doing this as a favor to my cousin and you. And because I can't believe none of us knew what was happening in the mansion. His voice grew tight. Sounds strange, but I feel almost a little responsible. I know the feeling. I should have asked. I should have noticed, but... Pear shrugged. Changing the subject, he said, I understand you'll be teaching the men a few things, and found 5 other teachers who will work with everyone full-time. I can't imagine how you pulled all of this together so well. Sir, it wasn't just me. I know you're not exactly a man of faith, but there have been miracles to make this happen. And I'd say it all began with you. Good thing it's dark and you can't see me blushing, Hifadi. Can't have a high general who blushes. It all began with Jezzy, though, or rather her in-laws. No, I mean the rescue and liberation. But Pear didn't want to talk about that. Jezzy's been set free, by the way. What? Hifadi cried, almost forgetting to keep his voice down. Why? Pear sighed. Negotiations. It was part of her deal. There should be no deal for such a woman. Agreed, but this is a complicated issue. The garrison has seized control of all the mansion's assets, and a third party has stepped in to negotiate how the mansion will be run. We've appointed a board of bookkeepers, former law enforcement officers, and business owners to give direction to the mansion. So why is she free? Because it was the only way she'd tell us who was on the rest of her killing squads, Pear explained. For her information, we've agreed to let her go back to the mansion. However, she doesn't have any more gold and silver to spend as she wishes, only a small allowance, which will make it impossible for her to pay off anyone. The killing squads are effectively killed. Thank the Creator, Hifadi sighed. Yes, but the problem is, not even she knows of who she employed. Anonymity was part of her deal with the squads. Her nephew, Lieutenant Colonel Lazen, had some records. We searched his rooms and found some books, but he'd made up his own code, which we haven't yet deciphered. And how has General Humphrey responded to all of this? His own man, a traitor to the army. Pear scoffed. Oh, he's been surprisingly quiet of late. I think he's a little shocked that so much was going on that he didn't bother to notice. As soon as he got back from pools, in record time, I must add, once he got notice that Lazen had died, he was most helpful, almost meek, I'd say, in uncovering all he could. He's going through boxes and boxes of files, the poor man, looking for what else we may have missed over the years. He tried not to feel too smug about that. The piles of hated paperwork would be considerably smaller by the time Pear returned to Idemia. But his smugness didn't last. It's most aggravating and also worrying, Tuma. If the rest of the killing squad hasn't been paid, they may do a job for free in vengeance. Jessie has agreed to let the army know if she receives any news of the former squad members so we can stop them, and she's promised she doesn't have any more secret relatives working anywhere. Lazen had been doing jobs for the Quarrels for nearly 20 years, ever since he was a teenager. None of us ever realized it. Hifadi grumbled under his breath. I don't know what you're saying, but I agree, Pear murmured back. We've sent investigators into the mansion's gardens to record how many people are buried there. Want to hear the count? I'm a little worried, but yes. 313, definite. Maybe up to 24 more. Hifadi exhaled. You can't be serious. It's an entire graveyard. It is, Pear said bitterly, and we're letting the garden grow over. We've told Quirrell it's a memorial now. Could any be identified? Not really, Pear admitted. No records, no dates on any of the rocks, but one burial is confirmed, one of the more recent ones. At the edge of the garden are 5 children. Quirrell III had purposely been looking for dead children, as far as I could discern. These little ones had wandered into a herd of cattle and were trampled. Third sent to the families and grasses to ask for their bodies to bury as a memorial to the youth of the world. They thought he made some kind of marker or headstone for them in the city cemetery where he buried them. When Pear didn't continue, Hifadi cleared his throat. I hate to ask, but I'll always wonder. So what did he do? Pear was silent for another moment before he said, It seems he merely tossed their bodies over the wall in order to terrify the family. The poor little ones were already bruised and mangled. He paused to clear the emotion from his throat. One of the family told me how broken they were. A stampede will do that, but that's not what the family believed. Third told them it was a result of the war, and if they didn't keep Clematis and Fengi close, they'd be next to be treated so horrendously. Both Clematis and Fengi helped with the burial. Third made sure of that. None of the family forgot that burial. Hifadi held a hand over his mouth. Just to scare them? Misusing someone's dead children just to push forward his own agenda? I know, Pear said, his teeth clenched again as they had when he'd first pieced together what had happened. I've decided not to tell the families. Let them believe the children are buried in Idemia Cemetery. We're having a large headstone created with their names on it, just in case one of the parents ever happens to travel to the city and looks for it. It's all we can do now. Hifadi shook his head sadly. In a way, I suppose that headstone could stand for all of the unidentified bodies. Good idea, Pear said quietly. I think I'll have the number of known dead etched on the back of the stone. No one else will know what it stands for, but it'll make me feel an ounce lighter that some kind of acknowledgement has been made. I'll make the mansion pay for it. Hifadi snorted. Can the Quarrels afford it? Well, Fourth can't afford to run a farm anymore. He may be selling that back section off as part of their reparations to get the family what they need now. As far as we can tell, there isn't anyone buried in the farm area. Fourth and Jessie will have just enough income for 10 servants, and that will have to suffice. Hifadi nodded into the dark. So, the mansion has real employees now. Started on the first day, in fact. At midday meal, my wife's friend Matilda walked into the mansion, the guards let her, found Quirrell sitting wretchedly on a sofa in one of the reception rooms, and she made him and his boys sandwiches. Allow me to guess, you sent her there. I can't help but feel bad for him, Tuma, Per confessed. The king is as useless as he is senseless. We're trying to get him some better advisors as well. A few men from the University of Idumea have volunteered to work with the committee we established. Now that Jezi is under control, we hope. Sir, it sounds like you've done as much as you can. I almost hate to say it, but... Say it. You have a lot of people suddenly involved. That may cause more problems in the future, sir. Per sighed. Ugh, it's causing problems now, already. But at least nothing can happen quickly in the government. Maybe if enough groups are arguing for a while, a better consensus can be reached. It's a working theory. As good as any other, Afadi replied. Per turned to him. You don't sound entirely convinced. Do you have any other suggestions for governing a population of 1 million people, each who has his or her own idea as to what they should be allowed to get away with? Hifadi could hear the uncharacteristic tension in his voice. I mean no disrespect, sir. I admire what you're doing here. Compliments again, Per exhaled. Quit flattering me. Just talk. Hifadi chuckled tightly. No flattery, but genuine appreciation. I'm just thinking about the first 500 families placed here, and how the Creator established a way to govern them, and Per's long exhalation stopped him. I've never been much for the writings, Tuma, nor for the stories about the Creator. Even if I was, he dealt with only 500 couples. 1 million people of various degrees of prosperity and willingness to work is something entirely different. Hifadi was silent, but Per could feel his last comment thrumming around him. Just say it, Tuma, get it out. Sir, this isn't entirely different. The same principles back then could work now. But you are correct, in that the variety of people now wouldn't allow it. It has to be their choice. Everyone has to be in agreement. Then, Per poked a finger into Hifadi's firm chest. There's the problem. Agreement. The committees I mentioned, they have less than a dozen people in them. But agreement? Ha! Too many opinions, too much knowledge. Too much pride, Hifadi suggested. Egos, Per grumbled. The world is stuffed full of them, especially in the army and in the city. But not you, sir, Hifadi said warmly. That's not flattery, I promise. You have real potential. Per rolled his eyes. Compliments again. He hadn't remembered Hifadi being so magnanimous when he was a soldier. Something in the past few years had softened the man. Hopefully not too much. He needed someone tough. Per tipped his head to the wagons, now nearly unloaded of people and their baggage. I'm sorry we couldn't stagger their arrival, but it wasn't possible. You mentioned something in one of your letters about problems shopping in the city? Oh, that was a rough day, Per chuckled ruefully. We needed to get them looking like everyone else. Who else wears silk for every day? The idea is to help them blend in, not stand out as a target for any disaffected killing squad members or garters. Hifadi winked at Per, which he nearly missed in the dark. The real purpose was to not let anyone know they were hopelessly naive former servants, with no understanding of the real world, which may leave them vulnerable to those with too much understanding and looking for easy targets. My wife Banu and Mrs. Kale tried to take a handful of them to the shopping district, but they became so distraught being apart. No one in the family has ever been out of shouting range of each other, and they didn't get more than 2 roads away before having to turn back because those with them became so anxious. So Banu and Kale had to bring clothing to them, take measurements, deliver finished goods, and then they were disappointed that our clothing didn't have ruffles and elaborate trim, and nothing was made out of silk. They'll get used to cotton soon enough, especially in the heat. Anyway, none of them could bear being too far apart, so we had to move all the reckons together. Wait, the Reckons? The last name all of them took. Pear still felt odd about that, realizing the first label he slapped on one of them had become the family name. He wished he'd been a little more prudent in what he'd said to their leader. At least it wasn't something like stubborn man or obnoxious voice, so Reckon was as good as anything. The drive here was daunting for them as well, Pear went on. For decades, they had believed that everyone lived in horrible conditions and had houses the size of chicken coops for some odd reason. But to see that nearly every house has a stone foundation, timber uppers, thick glass windows and gardens and fences, and that there are even a few smaller mansions, I can't describe the look on their faces, Tuma. Absolute astonishment mixed with betrayal and dismay. And to see so many children and teenagers going about their day laughing, shouting, running up and down the roads, dodging wagons. Some of them were in tears that life continued. Others were ready to run back to the mansion and beat Forth to a pulp until I reminded them that it wasn't Forth's fault, but firsts, seconds, and thirds, and they were already dead. Still, it wasn't good enough for a few of the family who had been feeling confined for decades, only to realize they never needed to be. Our rectors and teachers are going to help them through those feelings of betrayal, Hafati assured him, to discover that the world is something entirely different than what you've been led to believe. That takes some time to process. Glad you see that, Para continued, because I wholly underestimated the impact the truth would have on them. They're happy, yes, but also very, very angry. But overall, I think it will work out, Hafati decided, and arriving here so late hides the fact of just how many there are. They should be pretty untraceable, you think? In a low voice, Pear leaned over to Hafati. It's not the squads or the garters I'm afraid of. It's Forth. I suspected as much. I'm sure his mother is wanting. No, not her. What I mean is, the day after we liberated them, Forth went into a strange rampage. He had new servants and advisors entering the mansion to help put things in order, and apparently their presence set Forth off. We hadn't considered how attached he was to the rest of the Reckons. They call themselves the family, and Forth was as much as a part of it as anyone. Fangy, Hafati guessed? Even more than that. Some of the family are Forth's half-brothers and sisters, half-aunts and uncles. Tuma, it's clear now that first, second, and third each fathered some of the family. No one is entirely sure, but I'd say that including Fangy, 9 of them are of the royal line. 9 of them have as much claim to that ridiculously uncomfortable throne as Forth does. And he needs them around. But we've ripped away from Forth the majority of his family and left him with only the worst member, his mother. After such a quiet night in the mansion, he was determined to get his family back and headed out all alone after midday meal. My soldiers brought him back, as much for his safety as for the family's, and he threw a manic fit. That's when I told him that garters were seen within the borders of the city, and that my soldiers were on top of the situation, but that Forth would be dead by nightfall if he tried to get them back. Hafati was silent for a moment before he said, Never in my life have I felt sorry for any of the quarrels. Today, though, that's changed. He's facing a world he never expected, just like the rest of his family. Once Pear and Hafati and the undercover soldiers were confident everyone was settled for the night, Fangy running over to give Pear a hug before going to his new bed, Pear and Hafati strolled to the Wind's Fort, less than half a mile away, chatting about everything they didn't dare discuss in written correspondence. Lagging behind them a few paces was Ralph. He'd been on the trip as companionship for Clematis and Fangy. Pear had been initially worried how much Ralph enjoyed Clematis's attention, but soon Clematis began to notice lots of new boys. She still had eyes for Ralph, but Pear was sure this was just a passing fancy, especially since her eyes lingered on every passing male under age 25 during the past 2 days. Weary and not at all interested in his father's discussions, Ralph agreed to keep his distance so security measures could be discussed. Eventually, Hafati said, "I'd like to move them again, sir, once they've got their feet beneath them." "Oh, don't do that," Pear exclaimed. "We've already moved them twice. How much more can they stand?" "Not immediately, sir," Hafati assured him. "Maybe in a few moons or even years. It's not like Quirrell the Fourth is going to forget them. He'll long for them and try, sooner or later, to find them again. And that could be a very difficult situation for everyone. But if they just vanish—" "No," Pear said resolutely. "No, you can't do this to them again." "I wouldn't do it to them, General," Hafati said with just as much determination, "but for them." "No!" the High General snarled in a whisper, but it sounded as threatening as thunder. Hafati stopped, shocked. He'd never heard High General Shin, or even good-natured Lieutenant Pear, sound so furious. Ralph stopped a few feet behind him, having heard the snarl that cut through the night. With big eyes, he stared at his father. Pear felt a little guilty about his outburst, but the past week and a half had spread him thinner than a drop of butter on thick toast. Butter, toast, cold jelly, he was hungry. In a gentler voice, he repeated to Hafati, "No." The men stood just outside the fort walls in the dark, Hafati too stunned to move, Pear pacing in front of him, and Ralph hanging back. "I'm sorry," Pear said eventually. "I shouldn't have snapped. I'm half asleep and second-guessing everything we've been doing. Then you say that." Hafati cautiously asked, "Second-guessing what, sir?" Pear stopped pacing and noticed that Ralph was still within earshot. No matter. If he was someday going to be an officer, he has to learn that they don't always know everything. In fact, they rarely did. Did I do the right thing to him? Taking them away from the mansion, showing them that everything they ever believed was a lie intended to keep them trapped, demonstrating that the world is much, much larger than they ever imagined. Liberating them sounds so noble, but maybe I just shattered them beyond repair. Only time will tell, and I haven't slept well in over a week, fretting that some future time may reveal that in my first major task as High General, I ruined the lives of 33 innocent people. And all I was trying to do is figure out what happened to Margot. He gestured futilely to the air. And I haven't even solved that. Maybe it would have been kinder to leave them at the mansion, Pear muttered, resuming his nervous pacing. Maybe do a gentler transition, with teachers brought to them, with new advisors introduced, then give them the choice to leave on their own once they learned the truth. I don't know. I think I've lost 15 pounds this week. If being High General is this stressful, I'll be the skinniest officer in a year. No wonder Stumpy gave up and just sat there watching the horses out of his window. What was I thinking? He kept pacing, now adding hand massaging, head rubbing, and private mutterings. Hafati gently prodded. "Sir?" High General Shin didn't hear him, only the castigating of his own mind. Hafati tried again. Pear, look at me." Pear paused and turned to his security man, as if forgetting he was there. "Sometimes you can introduce change slowly," Hafati said, "but sometimes it has to come as a shock. So in your gut, no, in your heart, which I think is even bigger, what do you feel? Don't think about it, just answer as a shock." Pear cut him off. "It had to happen all at once. I don't know why, but I felt that was the right thing." Hafati nodded, then tipped his head. "How often did you experience that, Pear? That feeling of the right thing? Of maybe taking a turn just because you felt it was right, or noticing something that you wouldn't normally see?" Pear stared at him for a moment, then whispered, "In the past couple of weeks, more often than I ever have before, as if no decision was entirely mine, as if I were being nudged." Hafati smiled. "You were being nudged, Pear. As I said before, I know you don't believe much in the Creator, but it seems He believes a great deal in you. So much that He knew He could count on you to follow His nudges, as you put it." The Reckons aren't going to have an easy time, that's for sure. But that doesn't mean this wasn't the right thing to do. I feel it in my heart that this was necessary. It's the only reason I came out to help you. Rescues are never easy, but they're always worth it. And Pear, it's not by any chance that you're the new High General. I fully believe that the Creator had His hand in directing you to that position, to freeing those servants at the right time. You, sir, are the only man who could have climbed up that wall and showed them that there's a possibility of another life. Then they chose to follow you over that wall. It's going to be tough, but it's also going to be more rewarding than they ever suspected. High General Shin had been staring at the ground for the past few minutes, but when he looked up, his eyes were shiny in the light of the 2 full moons. He cleared his throat gruffly and said, "Since when do you call me Pear?" Hifadi smiled and said, "Since I realized what an extraordinary man you are." Together they said, "Compliments again." In silence they stood in the dark, both pondering, until Pear said, "Thank you, Tuma. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that. Granted, you may be as wrong as I am." Hifadi chuckled. "But at least we're united in our errors. I'll just put all the blame on you if something goes horribly wrong, so thank you in advance. However, I think you're a lot smarter than you let on to be." Pear side-eyed him, and Hifadi shook his head. "I think you've got a handle on a few things that you haven't shared with me." Tuma lifted up his chin. "Would you want it all as a shock, or little by little?" Pear chuckled. "The world isn't entirely as you think it is, Pear Shin," Hifadi said. "Of course it isn't," Pear sighed. "I'd be foolish to believe I knew everything. This week I've been plagued with the thought of what have I been taught that is actually an elaborate lie." "And would you really want to know? Would you want to know what to do about that lie?" Pear sighed. I'm doing what I can, Hifadi. I'm shattering the lies I find, securing the world as best I can, and hoping for the best. Sounds rather lame now that I say it out loud, but I know, until I know more, what can I do?" "Hoping for the best," Hifadi repeated. "What best are you hoping for?" "You're full of big questions tonight, aren't you?" Pear chuckled sadly. I guess hoping for the day when the land beyond the deserts and the mountains is clear again, when people can once again live in the ruined lands to the west, when the danger's gone, and my job is no longer needed." "Those are big hopes from a big man," Hifadi said, almost reverently. "Sadly, I think everything about me is big, too big," Pear said, trying to chuckle, but feeling he'd run out of humor. He was too weary for such discussions, too caught up in the worries of if he did the right things, too hungry, first of all, hungry for a lot of things he'd never get. But Hifadi wasn't done yet, even though Pear was yawning to try to give him a hint. "What if, sir? What if the western deserts were already clear, and the world not poisoned?" Pear wearily waved that off. "I saw the latest reports about the poisoned areas. Still poisoned, nothing's changed." That was years ago. "And it's been hundreds of years that the land's been dangerous. Everyone knows that. I'm sorry, Tuma, but I'm feeling like I'm going to fall over at any moment. And then no one will have any hope of moving me for the next 8 hours. I need to sleep. I'm just too—" And an enormous yawn nearly split his head in two. "Of course, sir, of course. I shouldn't keep you out here like this, talking your ear off. Your son is—oh dear, I do believe your son has actually fallen asleep leaning against the fort walls. I can just throw him over my shoulder. Let's get you both in." A few minutes later, Hifadi escorted father and son to the guest quarters of the fort at Winds, dropped Ralph as carefully as he could on the first cot, while Pear fell gracelessly on the second one, with a mumbled "tlubs," which he knew Tuma would interpret as thanks. High General Shin fell to snoring almost immediately, his cot creaking ominously beneath him. Ralph never knew that he'd been moved. Tumahafati spread a blanket over each of them, blew out the lantern, and evaluated the dozing High General. He pondered a few things, considered a few others, then closed his eyes to ask. Pear had missed it. The suggestions, the hints Tuma was dropping like bits of cake to see if Pear would sniff it out. But as hungry as the man was, he wasn't ready. He wasn't noticing. He was like the rest of the world, so sure he knew what was true, and because of that confidence, he wasn't ready for what was true, either in small bits or as one big shock. Hifadi smiled sadly at the two, shrugged in gentle defeat, saluted the general and his son, then closed the door. That's the end of the chapter. Thank you.